nonfiction that takes 3 stories and 3 different perspectives about suicide and then weaves them together to say, look at this, here is statistical proof of a method that works in reducing suicide rates, so why aren't we using it? It starts from the perspective of someone who's attending therapy and then switches to the therapist's perspective and story, and then it goes to the psychologist, whose name is Jerome Moto, and it talks about this sort of method that he developed of writing letters to people who have suicidal thoughts. And he found that that method was actually very effective. So the article is called The Best Way to Save People from Suicide, and it's by Jason Cherkis, and it is a part of Highline, which is a segment of the Huffington Post. So right off the bat, I think there are definitely a lot of biases that came into play when I read this. First of all, me choosing Highline articles in itself is sort of, I would say, a confirmation bias, because I know I've read several Highline articles in the past, and I know where they are on the political spectrum, and I know I understand how their articles work, and so in a way I sort of sought out something that was probably going to match what I already believed. I think additionally, the topic of suicide is very emotionally heavy, and I definitely had some sort of emotional bias, I would say, simply because suicide itself is very dear to my heart. So as I was reading this article, and a lot of it's written as characters, so the author is like sort of taken out of the story, and so being written in that very personal way, things like, I've always done what is needed to be done, and when I can stop pretending, I let it out, coming in sort of a quotesy, more direct way, I think it made me more susceptible to being sympathetic with these characters and being more ready to agree with what the author was telling me in the first place. I think it also made me a little bit cynical, because I didn't really expect much of a silver lining, but the story did sort of offer some approach on how to fix the issue, which was nice. I didn't think I did a very good job of mitigating my biases. However, I think that's, again, because of my confirmation bias, and a lot of it already agreed with what I was saying. Additionally, I think the author himself also had a lot of bias. It was very apparent to me when I read things like, he only felt guilty since there was nothing he could do from so far away. This is him, the author, talking about somebody else who, this psychologist, is actually dead now, so I don't know how he would have actually corroborated some of these things. I think a lot of what he says probably was true or close to true of what the psychologist would have said, but I think it does err on this side of, it may or may not be true, but it's nice because it's part of the story and it flows well, which is something in creative nonfiction that's kind of hard to see. Additionally, one thing that he did well, I would say, is that in writing in this creative nonfiction style, he ended a lot of paragraphs with quotes. So here's this paragraph ends in a quote, this paragraph ends in a quote, there's a lot of quotes. A lot of times when we're taught to write, we're told to say a quote and then explain it afterwards. But I think he didn't do that. He ended a lot of ideas with quotes. And so that allows the reader to take an idea and run with it on their own without having the author sort of explaining that idea and trying to explain the quote-unquote truth of what he's trying to tell you, which I think was very effective in this like sort of creative nonfiction approach, because it gives the reader some freedom to interpret what the author is trying to push for. Additionally, I think the author, I looked some stuff up, and the author has written several other articles about suicide and about drug use and how to like deal with those issues, and so I think it's very clear that the author has passion for this topic, and that's something that pushes the reader towards the truth, but I don't think it outright says the truth of what it's of the pure facts, because I think facts tends to leave out emotion, and then fiction tends to leave out facts, and so I wouldn't consider either of those just truth. Lastly, I'd like to leave you with a quote. This is from a letter that one of the psychologist's patients wrote to the psychologist, and it says, "Of all human experience, change is the hardest to adapt to." I think we try to put writing in boxes and say that this has to be fiction or this has to be nonfiction. But I think Highline articles are proof that you can kind of do both, and essentially it's more engaging. It keeps people invested in what the truth is. So I think this is part of why creative nonfiction exists, and why it should continue to exist.